Sandy Cheeks might look like just a squirrel in a diving suit, but there's a lot more to her than that. Behind her scientific genius and Texas-sized swagger, she's driven by a need to prove herself and a deep pride in who she is. To really understand Sandy, we have to look at the way she adapts, the battles she picks, and the time she learns that toughness isn't always about strength alone. So, settle in, grab some acorn tea, and let's take a look at the story of Sandy Cheeks. Before we start, subscribe! And let's get back to the video. Sandy Cheeks lives in a glass bubble at the bottom of the ocean, and somehow that's the least weird thing about her. Before she becomes SpongeBob's adventure buddy, she's just this squirrel from Texas who decided that drowning wasn't going to stop her from exploring the sea. That tree dome is her fortress, her laboratory, her little piece of dry land where the laws of physics bend to her will. Her tree dome is basically her entire personality in one glass bubble. It's this massive air-filled dome sitting on the ocean floor, complete with an oak tree, a bird bath, and enough Texas pride to fuel a small country. The place screams, "I don't need your underwater world to survive." She's literally built herself a piece of land at the bottom of the sea. That's not adaptation, that's conquest. But here's what's really wild about Sandy. She never tries to fit in. Most people who move somewhere new spend at least a little time figuring out local customs or toning down their differences. Not Sandy. She shows up in bikini bottom wearing a diving suit, speaking with a thick Texas drawl, and immediately starts explaining air to fish. When SpongeBob pretends he loves air too, even though he has no clue what it is, she doesn't catch on. She just assumes everyone is as obsessed with science as she is. The whole tea party situation in that first episode reveals something crucial about how Sandy operates. She invites SpongeBob over without even thinking about the fact that he's a sea creature who needs water to survive. It's not malicious. She's just so focused on her own world that she doesn't always see the obvious problems other people might have. When SpongeBob starts literally drying up in front of her, she's completely clueless until he's basically a living sponge chip. Karate Chopper shows us what Sandy does for fun. And surprise, it's fighting. Not gentle sparring or casual martial arts practice. Full contact, furniture destroying, house wrecking karate battles. She tracks SpongeBob down at grocery stores to jump him with karate moves. She calls him at home to try karate chopping him through the phone. This is a squirrel who has turned violence into her primary form of socializing. The episode makes it clear that the karate skills are legitimately dangerous. She can split rocks with her bare hands and send SpongeBob flying across town with a single chop, but she treats it like it's no big deal. Just another Tuesday in Texas, apparently. When Mr. Krabs finally puts his foot down about the karate disrupting work, Sandy acts like he's asking them to give up breathing. What's fascinating is how she completely fails to understand why anyone would have a problem with constant martial arts ambushes. To Sandy, if you're not ready to fight at any moment, you're just not living right. The idea that other people might want predictable, peaceful interactions doesn't compute. She sees SpongeBob getting fired over their karate sessions, and her first instinct is to fight harder. Then there's Sandy's rocket, where we get a full view of Sandy the scientist. She builds an actual functioning spacecraft in her backyard because she wants to collect moon rocks. Not because NASA hired her or because she's part of some research program, just because she felt like going to the moon and figured she'd build her own way there. The rocket itself is a perfect Sandy creation. Over-engineered, completely functional, and built without asking anyone's permission. She's got control panels, net guns for specimen collection, and enough fuel to make multiple trips to lunar orbit. When SpongeBob begs to come along, her objection is that this is serious science work, not a joyride. But here's where Sandy's personality creates problems she doesn't see coming. She's so confident in her own abilities that she doesn't consider what could go wrong. She leaves her rocket unguarded overnight, with Patrick and SpongeBob running around with alien repellent. She builds a spacecraft complex enough to require actual astronaut training, then casually invites a sponge who can barely drive a boat. When SpongeBob and Patrick inevitably steal her rocket and crash it, Sandy's reaction is telling. She doesn't panic or call for help. She straps on a jetpack and flies to the moon by herself to track them down. Of course she can navigate to lunar orbit solo. The woman is so prepared for everything that other people's chaos barely registers as an inconvenience. Throughout all 3 episodes, Sandy operates like someone who's never encountered a problem she couldn't solve with the right combination of science, martial arts, and pure Texas stubbornness. Her tree dome is proof that she can make any environment work on her terms. Her karate is her way of staying ready for whatever challenge comes next. Her rocket is evidence that if Sandy wants to go somewhere, she'll build her own transportation. The thing is, this approach actually works for her. She survives underwater in an air bubble. She builds functional spacecraft in her spare time. She can fight off giant sea creatures and win. Sandy earned that confidence through constant success. But living like that requires incredible control over your environment. Sandy's created this perfect bubble where her rules apply, her inventions work, and her fighting skills keep her safe. She's built herself a little piece of Texas at the bottom of the ocean, and she's made it work through sheer force of will. The question is, what happens when she runs into something that can't be solved with better engineering, harder punching, or more scientific knowledge? Something that requires inspires her to work with other people's limitations instead of just powering through them. Right now, Sandy's living in a world where being the smartest, strongest, most prepared person in the room solves everything. That's a pretty good life, as long as it lasts. Sandy's world, a fortress of dry air and Texas pride, shatters the moment a harmless race with SpongeBob turns into a cruel test of her worth. The first crack in Sandy's perfect underwater world comes disguised as friendly competition. She's sitting with SpongeBob, watching clouds drift by, feeling completely secure in her abilities. Everything's peaceful, everything's under control. And then SpongeBob makes one innocent comment about who would win a race to the coral cliffs, and suddenly Sandy's entire identity is on trial. What starts as casual bragging quickly spirals into something much darker. Sandy wins the climbing contest easily. Of course she does. She's a squirrel built for trees and rocks. But when SpongeBob beats her in an underwater race, something shifts. The loss itself isn't the problem, it's what comes after. SpongeBob calls her an air breather. Then, water sucker and tree climber get thrown around like insults. These aren't just playground taunts. They're direct attacks on everything Sandy represents. She's being told that her entire species is inferior. The real gut punch comes when Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs join in. Suddenly it's 4 against 1, and they're all listing off things Sandy can't do. She can't reproduce by budding. She can't retract her eyes. She can't breathe underwater without help. Everything that makes her different becomes ammunition against her. This is where Sandy's world breaks apart. For the first time since moving to Bikini Bottom, she's not the smartest person in the room. She's not the strongest or the most prepared. She's just this weird land creature who needs a fishbowl to survive. Sandy tries to defend herself by bragging about land creatures' abilities, cattle roping, pie eating, wood chopping, but every word proves their point. She's listing off skills that don't matter underwater. When Patrick demonstrates eating a Krabby Double Deluxe in one bite, Sandy tries to copy him, but the burger splats against her helmet like a food fight gone wrong. Everyone laughs. Then they start showing off sea creature abilities. Mr. Krabs pops his eye stalks, Squidward balances spinning plates, SpongeBob reproduces by budding right in front of her. Each trick drives the point home. You're the outsider here. The breaking point comes when SpongeBob delivers the killing blow. If it wasn't for that suit, you couldn't even live down here. The laughter gets louder, meaner. Sandy realizes she's trapped in a glass cage, literally and figuratively. That's when something snaps inside her. Sandy destroys herself to prove them wrong. She rips off her suit and smashes her helmet on the ground. This is desperation. She'd rather suffocate than admit weakness. Her face turns red. Her lungs shrivel up on screen. One literally breaks off and falls to the bottom of her chest cavity. She's drowning in front of people who were supposed to be her friend, and they're still making jokes about it. But instead of giving up, Sandy doubles down. She challenges all 4 of them to survive 1 minute on dry land. This is about revenge. Sandy wants to watch them struggle the way she just struggled. She wants them to feel helpless and exposed. The quiet squirrel watching clouds has been replaced by someone who will tear off her own life support to prove a point. That's a dangerous kind of courage. Sandy's fierce attempt to prove her worth begins to crumble as she faces moments of real hesitation and fear in the challenges that follow. Sandy Cheeks doesn't back down from fights. That's not who she is. But there are moments, brief, telling moments, where even the strongest squirrel in Bikini Bottom finds herself second-guessing what she's gotten herself into. In Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm, Sandy charges into battle mode the second she hears about the Alaskan bullworm terrorizing the town. Someone ate her tail, and by Texas law, that means war. She doesn't hesitate when the crowd needs a hero. She doesn't flinch when SpongeBob tries to warn her. She just grabs her lasso and heads straight for danger, confident that no creature on Earth could possibly be a match for her Texas-sized ego. But here's the thing about confidence. It works great until reality shows up uninvited. Sandy spends the entire walk to the worm's lair brushing off SpongeBob's warnings like they're mosquitoes at a barbecue. She's fought bull. She's fought worm. How hard could fighting both at the same time really be? When SpongeBob desperately tries to stop her, pulling out increasingly ridiculous distractions, Sandy just powers through. She's got this. She's always had this. Then she steps into the cave and realizing she's been fighting the worm's tongue. The actual worm is the size of a small mountain. Its mouth is big enough to swallow buildings. And suddenly, for the first time in the entire episode, Sandy's voice cracks when she says, "Oh, this is the tongue, and the whole thing is the worm." That moment, that tiny break in her voice, it's everything. It's the exact second Sandy realizes she's in way over her head. All that bravado, all that Texas tough talk, all those stories about wrangling bulls back home suddenly feel like playground bragging in the face of something genuinely dangerous. What makes this moment so powerful is that Sandy doesn't just admit she was wrong. She has to be chased halfway across Bikini Bottom while SpongeBob literally forces her to say it out loud. Even while running for her life, she can't bring herself to admit that maybe, just maybe, she bit off more than she could chew. Someone's in the kitchen with Sandy shows us a different kind of hesitation. Here, Sandy doesn't hesitate because she's afraid of the challenge. She hesitates because she doesn't know who she is without her fur. When Plankton steals her pelt, Sandy's first instinct is to hide. She wraps herself in a towel, puts a coffee pot on her head, and tries to sneak through town unnoticed. This is the same squirrel who usually karate chops her way through problems. But strip away her fur, and suddenly she's ducking behind garbage cans. The episode reveals something uncomfortable about Sandy's confidence. A lot of it comes from how she looks. Without her fur, she's just this pink, hairless creature that everyone points and laughs at. They call her a naked chipmunk and a nudist ferret. And for once in her life, Sandy doesn't have a comeback. She spends most of the episode trying to cover herself up with seaweed, hiding from crowds, and generally acting like someone who's lost their nerve. When the seaweed skirt breaks apart and leaves her exposed again, she doesn't fight back. She runs. She hides in the sewers and talks about needing help, which is something the old Sandy would never admit. The episode is about having her identity stripped away and realizing she doesn't know who she is underneath. Without her fur, without her suit, without all the external things that make her Sandy Cheeks, she's just another scared creature trying not to get laughed at. Both episodes show Sandy at her most vulnerable, but in completely different ways. With the bullworm, her physical confidence gets shattered. She learns that being tough doesn't mean you can take on anything, no matter how big. With the stolen fur, her social confidence gets destroyed. She learns that a lot of her swagger comes from looking the part. What's fascinating is how she handles these moments differently. When faced with the giant worm, Sandy eventually admits she was wrong, but only after being literally chased into submission. When faced with public humiliation, she tries to hide and avoid the problem entirely. These moments of doubt make Sandy more human. They show us that even the most confident people have limits, and being brave doesn't mean never being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. But Sandy's doubt and fear leave room for SpongeBob to become the unexpected mentor she truly needs. Every tough person has moments when they need someone softer to show them a different way of looking at the world. For Sandy Cheeks, that moment turns out to be SpongeBob SquarePants, the yellow sponge who sees everything through optimistic eyes and refuses to give up on people, even when they've given up on themselves. Sandy doesn't need much help with karate or science or building rockets. She's got those things covered. But when it comes to understanding emotions, accepting vulnerability, and figuring out what home really means, she's got some blind spots. And that's where SpongeBob comes in, not as a teacher with lessons to preach, but as a friend who shows her through his actions what it looks like to care about people unconditionally. In Texas, Sandy hits her lowest point in Bikini Bottom. She's homesick, defeated, and ready to pack her bags and leave everything behind. The town feels foreign. The friends feel distant. Even her tree dome starts feeling like a prison instead of a sanctuary. When she sits on top of her dome singing about missing Texas, she's mourning the person she used to be when she belonged somewhere completely. He doesn't tell her she's being dramatic or that she should be grateful for what she has. Instead, he listens, and then he does something that changes everything. He decides to show her how much she means to the people around her. The party he throws isn't perfect. The decorations are hilariously wrong. Square dancing involves someone holding a literal square, 10-gallon hats or water jugs turned upside down. The whole thing is a disaster by any reasonable standard, but that's exactly what makes it beautiful. SpongeBob doesn't try to recreate Texas. He tries to show Sandy that she's loved for who she is, not where she's from. When Sandy sees the ridiculous party, something clicks. She's been so focused on what Bikini Bottom lacks compared to Texas that she missed what it actually offers. People who care enough to make fools of themselves just to make her smile. SpongeBob teaches her that home is about being surrounded by people who see her worst moments and choose to stay anyway. What's remarkable about SpongeBob's approach is that he never makes Sandy feel ashamed for wanting to leave. He doesn't guilt trip her or make her homesickness seem stupid. He just shows her another perspective. Through his eyes, she starts to see that missing Texas and loving Bikini Bottom aren't mutually exclusive. She can honor where she came from while building something new where she is. In Something Smells, SpongeBob accidentally creates a different kind of crisis with his breath that could clear a football stadium. Everyone in town runs away from it, but they're too polite to tell him why. Sandy finds herself in an impossible situation. Should she hurt his feelings by telling him the truth, or should she let him suffer in confusion? At first, Sandy chooses the comfortable lie. She watches SpongeBob spiral into thinking he's ugly, sees him isolate himself at home, and still can't bring herself to say what's wrong. She's trying to protect his feelings, but she's actually making everything worse. SpongeBob's emotional pain grows deeper the longer the truth stays hidden, but SpongeBob's own honesty eventually saves the day. When he finally figures out what's really happening, he doesn't get angry at Sandy for not telling him sooner. He doesn't make her feel guilty for hesitating. Instead, he laughs about it. He owns the problem and fixes it, and moves on. His reaction teaches Sandy something crucial about their friendship. He's stronger than she thought, and he values honesty more than false comfort. SpongeBob shows Sandy that real care sometimes means saying difficult things, that protecting someone from minor embarrassment while they suffer major confusion isn't actually kindness. He demonstrates that you can be honest about problems without being cruel about them. And most importantly, he proves that their friendship is strong enough to handle uncomfortable truths. In Sandy's Nutty Nieces, Sandy gets overwhelmed trying to manage her chaotic family members while maintaining her usual competent image. Her nieces are tiny tornadoes who destroy everything they touch, and Sandy's normal problem-solving approach isn't working. She's used to controlling situations through preparation and skill, but children don't respond to engineering solutions. SpongeBob volunteers to help without being asked. He doesn't know anything about childcare either, but he jumps in anyway because he sees Sandy struggle. And even though his babysitting attempts are complete disasters, the kids destroy the Krusty Krab, bury him in concrete, and generally cause chaos everywhere they go, his willingness to try means everything to Sandy. What SpongeBob teaches Sandy here is about accepting help when you need it, and recognizing that being good at some things doesn't mean you have to be good at everything. He shows her that admitting you're in over your head is honesty, and sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is just stick around when things get messy, even if you can't fix them. The deeper lesson Sandy learns from SpongeBob across all these episodes is about the difference between strength and stubbornness. Sandy's used to powering through problems alone, maintaining her tough exterior and never letting anyone see her struggle. But SpongeBob's approach to life, open, vulnerable, willing to fail publicly and try again, gradually shows her that there's strength in letting people help you. SpongeBob doesn't try to change Sandy's fundamental nature. He doesn't make her less tough or less independent. Instead, he shows her that true toughness includes the courage to be honest about your feelings, to ask for help when you need it, and to let people love you even when you're not at your best. Through SpongeBob's example, Sandy learns that admitting you don't have all the answers doesn't make you less capable. It makes you human, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone else be strong for you. SpongeBob teaches Sandy these lessons not through lectures or advice, but by simply being himself consistently. His unwavering optimism and genuine care gradually wear down her defenses and show her new ways of moving through the world. He proves that kindness is just as valuable as any other kind of smarts. In the end, Sandy doesn't become less of herself because of SpongeBob's influence. She keeps her scientific mind, her karate skills, and her Texas pride, but she adds emotional openness, acceptance of help, and a deeper understanding of what friendship really means. That's what good guidance looks like, helping them become the fullest version of who they already are. Then, Sandy's journey of learning from SpongeBob sets her up for the challenge of truly blending in with Bikini Bottom. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to subscribe to our channel. There comes a moment for every outsider when they stop trying to fit in and start making their own space. For Sandy Cheeks, that moment doesn't happen all at once. It's a series of small decisions where she chooses to engage with Bikini Bottom on her own terms instead of staying safely isolated in her glass dome. In Squirrel Jelly, Sandy makes her first real attempt to join SpongeBob and Patrick's world of jellyfishing. Up until now, she's been the observer, the scientist studying underwater life from a distance. But something about their peaceful hobby draws her in. She wants to be part of it, not just watch it happen. The problem is, Sandy approaches jellyfishing the same way she approaches everything else, as a competition to be won. She shows up at Goo Lagoon already dominating basketball games and hot dog eating contests, annoying everyone with her aggressive approach to what should be simple fun. When SpongeBob and Patrick escape to Jellyfish Fields for some peace, Sandy follows them, completely missing the point that they're trying to get away from her competitive energy. But here's what's important. Sandy doesn't give up and go home. When SpongeBob explains that jellyfishing is about gently catching and releasing the creatures, Sandy tries to adapt. She's bored by the traditional approach, sure, but she makes an effort to understand their way of doing things. That's new for her. Usually, Sandy imposes her methods on everyone else. The moment everything changes is when Sandy decides to spice up the game with Frankenstein fish food. She turns the gentle jellyfish into aggressive monsters, transforming the peaceful activity into something that matches her need for excitement. It's a disaster that nearly destroys Jellyfish Fields, but it's also Sandy actively trying to bridge two different worlds, her competitive land culture and their laid-back underwater tradition. When the giant jellyfish monster attacks her tree dome later, Sandy has to choose between her new meditation phase and protecting her friends. She abandons her attempt at being zen and fights the monster from the inside, literally entering its world to defeat it. By the end, she's found a middle ground. She can appreciate the gentle nature of jellyfishing while still being true to her competitive spirit. Houseworming shows Sandy making an even bigger leap. When SpongeBob arrives at her tree dome completely infested with worms, most people would slam the door and wait for the problem to go away. Sandy doesn't do that. Instead, she opens her most private space, her scientific sanctuary, to help solve the crisis. The episode reveals something crucial about Sandy's evolution. Her tree dome has always been her fortress, the one place where she can be completely herself without adapting to underwater life. It's filled with her inventions, her Texas memorabilia, her carefully controlled environment. When she allows the worm-infested SpongeBob inside, she's essentially saying that her friendship matters more than her comfort zone. Later, when all the worms move into Squidward's house at the end, we see the broader implications. Sandy has become someone who deals with Bikini Bottom's chaos, rather than hiding from it. She's no longer the isolated scientist. She's an active participant in the community's weird problems. systems. The Way of the Sponge represents Sandy's most complete integration into underwater life. When Fuzzy Acorn shows up to test her karate skills, Sandy could easily handle the situation alone. She's clearly skilled enough to earn whatever belt she wants, but instead, she brings SpongeBob into the process, insisting that he deserves a chance to prove himself too. This episode shows Sandy fully embracing her role as a teacher and advocate within the Bikini Bottom community. When Fuzzy humiliates SpongeBob and takes away his belt, Sandy doesn't just accept the master's judgment. She fights for her friend, convincing Fuzzy to come to the Krusty Krab to see SpongeBob in his element. The key moment comes when Sandy realizes that SpongeBob's skills as a fry cook are actually advanced karate techniques. She's learned to see underwater life through new eyes, recognizing that mastery can take forms that land-based traditions might not understand. By advocating for SpongeBob's unique talents, Sandy is also validating her own choice to build a life in this strange underwater world. What makes these episodes significant is how Sandy stops trying to change Bikini Bottom to suit her needs, and starts finding ways to contribute her strengths to their existing culture. She doesn't abandon her Texas identity or scientific mind, but she learns to apply them in service of her underwater friends and community. Each episode shows Sandy making a choice that pulls her deeper into Bikini Bottom life. In Squirrel Jelly, she chooses to keep trying instead of giving up when her approach doesn't work. In Housewarming, she chooses to help instead of protecting her private space. In Way of the Sponge, she chooses to advocate for her friend instead of just focusing on her own achievements. By the end of these episodes, Sandy isn't the same squirrel who first arrived in Bikini Bottom. She's someone who belongs there, not because she's learned to perfectly adapt, but because she's found ways to make her unique contributions valuable to the community. She's stopped being a visitor and become a resident, not just of the ocean, but of the weird, wonderful world that is Bikini Bottom culture. But Sandy's choice to embrace Bikini Bottom leads to new challenges that test her friendships and values in ways she never expected. Now that Sandy has committed to life in Bikini Bottom, the real work begins. She faces challenges that test not just her karate skills or scientific knowledge, but her ability to navigate this underwater world's strange rules and even stranger people. Some episodes reveal who she can count on when things get tough. Others expose the kind of enemies that threaten everything she's built. Karate Island presents Sandy with what appears to be her dream scenario: recognition as the greatest karate fighter alive. When she receives an invitation declaring her king of karate, her ego takes over completely. She doesn't question why she's being honored or investigate who's behind the invitation. She just assumes she's finally getting the respect she deserves. This blind confidence reveals a dangerous flaw in Sandy's personality. Her need for validation can override her usually sharp instincts. The whole setup is a trap, but Sandy walks right into it because it feeds her pride. Master Udon is a real estate agent trying to scam her into buying a timeshare. The Karate Island is actually Condo Island, and the entire martial arts theme is just marketing. When Sandy realizes she's been played, she doesn't just feel embarrassed. She feels betrayed. Someone used her passion for karate to manipulate her, turning her greatest strength into a weakness. The episode resolves with Sandy learning a hard lesson about skepticism. She saves SpongeBob from the scam, but not before recognizing how her pride made her vulnerable. The real enemy here is Sandy's own arrogance. She discovers that being the best fighter in Bikini Bottom doesn't protect her from being outsmarted by a smooth-talking con artist. By the end, she's more humble and more suspicious, qualities that will serve her well in future challenges. Atlantis Square puts Sandy in an entirely different kind of test, one where her scientific minds become her greatest asset. When the gang discovers the amulet that opens the path to Atlantis, Sandy approaches the situation like a researcher, not an adventure seeker. While everyone else gets excited about treasure and ancient cities, Sandy focuses on the learning opportunity. This episode shows how Sandy's intellectual curiosity drives her more than greed or fame. Inside Atlantis, Sandy finds herself in paradise. The Hall of Science contains technology beyond anything she's ever imagined. The biomass converting device, the nanoscale germ fighting game, the advanced inventions. Everything represents knowledge she could spend lifetimes studying. But the episode also tests her loyalty. When SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally destroy Atlantis' most prized possession, Sandy doesn't just abandon them or try to save herself. She stands with her friends even when it means giving up access to incredible scientific resources. The resolution comes when Lord Royal Highness decides that plankton makes a better replacement for the destroyed bubble than any punishment could. Sandy loses her chance to study Atlantean technology, but she gains something more valuable: proof that she values friendship over personal advancement. She leaves Atlantis having proven that her scientific curiosity doesn't come at the expense of her loyalty. The episode establishes Sandy as someone who won't sacrifice her principles for knowledge, no matter how tempting the offer. Bubble Troubles forces Sandy into a crisis that threatens her most basic need. When SpongeBob and Patrick's spicy bubble experiment melts her air supply lines, Sandy faces potential suffocation. Her tree dome floods completely, leaving her with only the air in her suit to survive. This episode tests whether Sandy can maintain her problem-solving ability capabilities when her life is literally on the line. The water rising around her tree dome represents the constant danger of underwater life for a land creature. Sandy's response reveals both her strengths and her limitations. She tries to reach her submarine to get to the surface, but SpongeBob's well-meaning help makes everything worse. When he opens the submarine door, it floods too. Sandy becomes increasingly disoriented from oxygen deprivation, which leads to her making poor decisions like crashing the submarine into the Krusty Krab. The episode shows that even Sandy's scientific training has limits when basic survival is threatened. The problem resolves when SpongeBob uses an oxygen tank to create a giant air bubble that refills her tree dome. But the real resolution is deeper. Sandy learns that surviving underwater sometimes requires accepting help from others, even when their assistance seems chaotic or destructive. SpongeBob's unconventional solution saves her life, proving that different approaches to problems can be equally valid. Sandy gains humility about her own limitations and appreciation for her friend's unique problem-solving methods. Chimps Ahoy presents Sandy with her most professional challenge yet. Her scientific benefactors arrive to evaluate her work, and everything she's invented seems inadequate. The Nutcracker doesn't work, the nut-talking helmet is useless, and the Nutachino machine is more torture device than beverage maker. This episode tests whether Sandy can handle failure in front of the people whose approval matters most to her career. The pressure to impress her bosses conflicts with her usual confidence in her abilities. SpongeBob and Patrick try to help by building their own invention, a ridiculous contraption that combines back scratching, hair combing, nose picking, and ukulele tuning. The machine works initially, but then goes berserk, attacking Lord Reginald with various weapons and tools. Their attempt to help nearly gets Sandy fired, demonstrating how good intentions can sometimes make situations worse. Sandy watches her friends destroy her professional reputation while trying to save it. The resolution comes when Sandy's simple Nutcracker, the one invention she dismisses as a failure, turns out to peel bananas perfectly. The chimps have been searching for a banana peeler for over a century, making Sandy's broken invention the most valuable discovery in their history. She learns that success sometimes comes from unexpected directions, and that her harshest critics can become her biggest supporters. The episode shows Sandy that professional validation often comes from persistence and patience, not just brilliant innovation. Rodeo Days tests Sandy's ability to blend her Texas identity with her bikini bottom life. When she receives a letter about defending her rodeo championship, she faces a choice between her past and her present. The episode challenges her to prove that she can maintain her Texas roots while fully committing to underwater life. SpongeBob's misguided attempt to help, capturing everyone in bubbles to save her from the rodeo, creates the very problem Sandy was trying to avoid. The underwater journey to Texas reveals how much Sandy's perspective has changed. She's no longer just a Texan temporarily living underwater. She's become someone who belongs in both worlds. When SpongeBob's interference causes her to lose the rodeo competition, Sandy is frustrated that her friend didn't trust her ability to handle the situation alone. The episode tests whether their friendship can survive SpongeBob's overprotectiveness and Sandy's independence. The resolution comes when Sandy saves SpongeBob from the bullfrog, proving that she can take care of herself and others simultaneously. She tells SpongeBob to leave future rodeos to her, establishing boundaries about when she needs help and when she doesn't. The episode concludes with Sandy accepting that she'll always be torn between two worlds, but that doesn't mean she has to choose between them. She learns to set clear expectations with her friends about respecting her capabilities. The hotshot introduces Sandy to Tony Fast Jr., someone whose arrogance matches her own competitive spirit. When Tony helps SpongeBob improve his driving, Sandy initially approves of the mentorship, but Tony's reckless attitude and disregard for safety rules conflict with Sandy's more responsible approach to teaching. The episode tests whether Sandy can recognize when competition becomes dangerous, and whether she'll intervene to protect her friends. Tony's influence on SpongeBob creates increasingly dangerous situations: illegal street racing, police chases, and eventually a crash that destroys Mrs. Puff's boating school. Sandy watches from the sidelines as someone else's mentoring style leads SpongeBob into serious trouble. The episode challenges her to decide when to step in and when to let SpongeBob learn from his own mistakes. Her restraint shows growth in her understanding of friendship dynamics. The resolution comes when Tony's reckless teaching methods finally catch up to him. He gets transferred to another school, and SpongeBob is banned from driving altogether. Sandy learns that not all mentors have their students' best interests at heart, and that sometimes the most helpful thing she can do is nothing. The episode teaches her to distinguish between healthy competition and dangerous recklessness, a lesson that applies to her own teaching method. Petsitter Pat tests Sandy's ability to trust others with responsibilities that matter to her. While this episode focuses mainly on Patrick's disastrous pet sitting, Sandy's choice to trust Patrick reveals her growing integration into Bikini Bottom's social network. She's moved beyond just relying on SpongeBob and started building relationships with his other friends. Asking Patrick to help demonstrates that Sandy now sees herself as part of a community rather than an isolated scientist. Patrick's complete failure to follow instructions and near destruction of SpongeBob's house could have ended Sandy's trust in the group entirely. Instead, she seems to understand that Patrick's incompetence comes from good intentions rather than malice. The flooded house and Gary's eventual safety proves that sometimes things work out despite poor planning. Sandy learns that trusting friends means accepting their limitations while accepting their loyalty. The resolution shows Sandy maintaining her friendship with Patrick despite his obvious shortcomings. She doesn't lecture him or cut him off. She accepts that this is who he is and adjusts her expectations accordingly. This represents a major evolution in Sandy's character, from someone who demanded perfection to someone who values relationships over results. She's learned to work with people as they are, rather than trying to change them into what she thinks they should be. Through these challenges, Sandy discovers that life underwater requires different skills than she initially expected. Fighting, science, and Texas toughness matter, but so do trust, patience, and the ability to work with imperfect allies. She faces enemies who threaten her physically, professionally, and emotionally, but she also builds relationships that help her weather those storms. The real test is whether she can thrive there while staying true to herself. Sandy's tests with friends and enemies have shown both her limitations and her loyalty, but now she has to face something even bigger, her own inner fears. Sandy Cheeks has spent her entire underwater career proving herself through science, karate, and sheer Texas determination. But there comes a moment when all that preparation faces its ultimate test, when the familiar tools and confidence that got her this far suddenly don't feel like enough for what's coming. It Came from Goo Lagoon begins with Sandy in her element, analyzing a simple beach phenomenon with scientific precision. When purple goo bubbles start emerging from Goo Lagoon, she immediately recognizes the danger that everyone else ignores. This is a moment where her scientific training collides with everyone else's willful ignorance. Sandy tries to warn the beachgoers, explaining the toxic nature of the supergoo and its potential to destroy Bikini Bottom if it becomes unstable. But here's where everything shifts for Sandy. For the first time in her underwater life, being right isn't enough. Her warnings fall on deaf ears. SpongeBob and Patrick continue playing with the dangerous bubbles. The news media treats her concerns like the ravings of a paranoid scientist. Even when she appears on television, desperately trying to communicate the severity of the situation, people dismiss her as the crazy squirrel who's overthinking a harmless beach phenomenon. Sandy watches helplessly as Plankton manipulates the situation, using her own scientific discovery to create a weapon that threatens everything she's worked to protect. This episode strips away Sandy's usual confidence in a brutal way. She's not wrong about the science. She's absolutely correct about every prediction she makes. But knowledge without the ability to convince others becomes a special kind of torture. Sandy finds herself in the impossible position of watching a disaster unfold in slow motion while everyone around her actively contributes to making it worse. When the giant goo bubble finally threatens Bikini Bottom, Sandy doesn't get to say "I told you so." She has to clean up a mess that could have been prevented if anyone had listened to her in the first place. The resolution comes when Sandy's submarine is destroyed and she has to work with SpongeBob and Patrick on foot to stop Plankton's scheme. But even then, the victory feels hollow. Mr. Krabs turns the disaster into a profit opportunity, and everyone seems to forget that Sandy's warnings could have prevented the entire crisis. The episode leaves Sandy with the hard truth that being the smartest person in the room means nothing if you can't make people care about what you know. Whatever happened to SpongeBob puts Sandy in an entirely different kind of crisis, one where her scientific solutions are useless because the problem is emotional. When SpongeBob disappears after everyone calls him Idiot Boy, Sandy faces the reality that her harsh words contributed to driving away someone who genuinely cared about her. This is about confronting the fact that her impatience and anger have real consequences for the people around her. Sandy's response reveals something crucial about her character development. She doesn't just feel guilty, she takes action. She builds a sponge tracker device and organizes a search party. But the real challenge is admitting that she was wrong and that her treatment of SpongeBob was unfair. When Squidward destroys her tracking device, Sandy doesn't rebuild it or create something better. Instead, she continues the search on foot, showing that her commitment to finding SpongeBob goes beyond her usual reliance on technology. The most telling moment comes when they finally locate SpongeBob in New Kelp City, and he doesn't remember any of them due to his amnesia. Sandy has to face the possibility that her friend might be permanently lost, not because of some external threat she can fight, but because of damage she helped cause. When SpongeBob calls her a talking weasel and doesn't recognize their friendship, Sandy experiences something she's never had to deal with before: being completely forgotten by someone whose opinion matters to her. The episode forces Sandy to confront the difference between being respected for her abilities and being valued as a friend. Throughout her time in Bikini Bottom, she's built her identity around being the competent one, the problem solver, the expert. But SpongeBob's amnesia strips away all that history, leaving Sandy to wonder if their friendship meant anything beyond her usefulness. When SpongeBob briefly regains his memories, only to announce that he's leaving again for New Kelp City, Sandy has to accept that even doing everything right, might not be enough to keep the people she cares about in her life. Both episodes share a common thread. They put Sandy in situations where her usual strengths become limitations. In It Came from Goo Lagoon, her scientific expertise is correct but ignored. In Whatever Happened to SpongeBob, her technical skills can locate her missing friend, but can't repair the emotional damage that caused him to leave. These aren't problems she can karate chop or engineer her way out of. They require her to be vulnerable, to admit fault, and to accept that some things are beyond her control. These experiences prepare Sandy for whatever comes next by stripping away her certainty and forcing her to find new ways of moving through the world. The squirrel who once arrived in Bikini Bottom confident she could handle anything now understands that the biggest challenges aren't always external. Sometimes the most important battles happen inside, where doubt and regret live, and where even Texas toughness isn't enough to guarantee victory. Sandy's new understanding of her limits sets her up for her toughest challenge yet, one that will push her past everything she thought she knew. But before we continue, subscribe and let's get back to the video. Every dreamer eventually faces a moment where their biggest aspiration becomes their worst nightmare. For Sandy Cheeks, that moment comes disguised as the perfect vacation, a trip to the moon that transforms into a fight for survival that tests everything she believes about herself. Mooncation starts with Sandy living her ultimate fantasy. She's built a rocket, planned every detail, and prepared for the space adventure she's dreamed about since arriving in Bikini Bottom. This is a return to her roots as an explorer, a chance to prove that the land squirrel can conquer any frontier, even space itself. When SpongeBob accidentally crashes her solo trip by bringing a sheet cake, Sandy's first instinct is annoyance. She has to recalculate weight, adjust fuel consumption, and deal with an untrained passenger who doesn't understand basic space safety. But that cake becomes more than just an inconvenience. When it breaks apart in zero gravity and clogs the ship's systems, Sandy faces her first real crisis. Everything she's planned and prepared for starts falling apart because of something completely outside of her control. She has to suit up and go outside of the ship to manually clear the blockage, a dangerous procedure that could leave her stranded in space if anything goes wrong. For the first time in the episode, Sandy's confidence wavered. She's no longer the expert tour guide showing off her latest invention. She's someone fighting to keep herself and SpongeBob alive. The moon landing initially restores Sandy's sense of mastery. She demonstrates her moonboarding skills with impressive tricks. The flippity-doo-dah, the Texas tail grab, the 720 nut job. Each move showcases her adaptability and expertise. She's in her element again, proving that even in an alien environment, Texas ingenuity can thrive. But when SpongeBob tries to copy her moves, everything changes. He's too light for lunar gravity and floats away helplessly. Sandy has to rescue him with a makeshift lasso, and suddenly she's responsible for keeping someone else alive in a hostile environment. SpongeBob's subsequent moonboarding attempts become increasingly dangerous. He crashes into satellites, damages equipment, and finally punctures the fuel tank that they need to go home. This is where Sandy's ordeal truly begins. She's no longer on a fun space adventure. She's facing the very real possibility that her dream trip will become a death trap for both of them. The fuel gauge shows empty. The rocket is falling towards Earth without power. Everything Sandy has worked for and planned is disintegrating in real time. What happens next reveals who Sandy really is beneath all her bravado and technical expertise. Instead of panicking or blaming SpongeBob for ruining her trip, she takes action. She goes outside the rocket again, this time while it's hurtling towards Earth, and does something that should be impossible. She lassos the nose of her own rocket and physically changes its trajectory through sheer force of will. Sandy is refusing to accept defeat, even when physics says she should. The image of Sandy floating in space, holding a rope attached to a burning rocket, trying to prevent it from becoming a fireball, is the visual representation of her entire character. She's literally holding her world together with her bare hands while everything falls apart around her. The rocket crashes anyway, and Sandy is thrown unconscious to the ground. For a moment, it seems like her dream has killed her. When Sandy wakes up to SpongeBob apologizing for ruining her vacation, she faces a choice that defines her character. She could blame him for turning her perfect trip into a disaster. Instead, she tells him that it was the most fun she's had in ages and immediately starts planning their next adventure to Mars. This is a fundamental realization about what matters to her. Sandy discovers that her greatest adventures aren't the ones that go according to plan. They're the ones where she has to save people she cares about. The moon trip becomes meaningful not because she got to show off her skills, but because she learned to value shared experiences over solo achievements. She realizes that having someone to protect makes her stronger, not weaker. The episode ends with Sandy suggesting they bring more sheet cakes on future trips, the very thing that caused all the problems in the first place. Sandy is embracing the chaos that comes with caring about others. She's learned that perfect planning can't account for the human element, and that the human element is what makes adventures worth taking. Sandy doesn't emerge from this experience as a different person. She emerges as a more complete version of herself, someone who combines Texas toughness with genuine care for others, someone who can lasso a rocket and still laugh about sheet cakes afterward. Sandy's journey on the moon opens her eyes to what really matters and sets her up for the quiet strength she'll need back in Bikini Bottom. After everything Sandy's been through, watching her growth serum nearly consume Bikini Bottom whole, seeing divine power spiral into chaos that floods the town with ice cream, and preventing sewer disasters that could have drowned thousands, maybe a thank you from the mayor, a scientific award, or even just someone remembering that she prevented their world from ending. But that's not how things work in Bikini Bottom. Instead of recognition, Sandy gets something else entirely. Life goes back to normal. SpongeBob keeps creating chaos, Patrick stays blissfully ignorant, and Mr. Krabs chases money while everyone pretends the near apocalypse has never happened. The town moves on like nothing extraordinary occurred, leaving Sandy to process what she's learned about herself and her place in the underwater world. Sandy's not the same after these experiences. She doesn't need validation anymore from people who can't see past their own problems. The girl who once desperately tried to prove she belonged in Bikini Bottom has become someone who understands that true value doesn't require witnesses. She's learned that being right all the time is both a gift and a curse, especially when you're surrounded by people who prefer comfortable chaos over uncomfortable solutions. This understanding doesn't come with fanfare. There's no moment of realization or inspiring speech. It builds slowly through small incidents where Sandy notices her helicopter starts while others panic. Her scientific thinking solves what others can't grasp, and her preparation saves lives that never know they were in danger. In the Krabby Patty that ate Bikini Bottom, Mr. Krabs sees Sandy's growth serum and immediately thinks about profit. She explicitly warns him to only use one drop. He completely ignores her and dumps the entire container onto a Krabby Patty, which creates a monster that nearly devours their world. When the crisis unfolds, Sandy doesn't waste time saying "I told you so." She takes action. While everyone else runs screaming, she climbs into her helicopter and coordinates the solution that saves everyone. The town celebrates SpongeBob for absorbing the monster, but nobody mentions who figured out he could do it, or who guided the rescue operation from above. Sandy watches this and learns something important about her role. She's not there to be celebrated. She's here to be ready when everything falls apart. Trident Trouble pushes this lesson further. When SpongeBob accidentally gets hold of Neptune's trident, he creates supernatural chaos that defies logic. Giant pacifiers start eating babies, murderous grass attacks gardeners, and ice cream floods threaten to drown everyone. Sandy approaches this impossible situation the same way she approaches everything else, with scientific thinking and practical solutions. She doesn't get distracted by the magic or overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. She analyzes the problem, identifies what needs to happen, and provides guidance that helps restore order. What she learns is about staying rational when everyone else loses their mind. Someone needs to maintain logic when chaos takes over. The town doesn't understand why disasters resolve faster when Sandy's involved, but they unconsciously start depending on her steady presence during impossible situations. She becomes their anchor without them realizing it. The sewers of Bikini Bottom shows Sandy's influence operating behind the scenes. While SpongeBob and Squidward create plumbing disasters that flood stadiums and unleash sewer monsters, Sandy's scientific principles echo through whatever solutions eventually emerge. Her intellectual framework provides the foundation for fixes that others stumble toward. Sandy starts understanding that her greatest contribution is sometimes building systems strong enough to withstand other people's mistakes. Her inventions, her knowledge, her careful planning create safety nets that catch the community when it inevitably falls. These experiences teach Sandy something difficult about intelligence in a place that doesn't value thinking. Being the smartest person in Bikini Bottom means constantly watching preventable problems unfold, offering solutions that get ignored, and cleaning up messes made by people who never learn from consequences. She could leave any time. Her helicopter works, her dome protects her, and her scientific knowledge would be valuable anywhere. But she stays, and through staying, she discovers something unexpected. Purpose doesn't require appreciation. She finds meaning in being the person who prevents disaster, even when nobody notices the disaster she prevents. Sandy becomes comfortable with being underestimated because underestimation lets her work more effectively. She stops seeking validation from people who can't understand her value and starts finding satisfaction in the work itself. She transforms from an outsider trying to earn acceptance into someone who chooses to maintain just enough distance to see clearly. When the crises end and normal life resumes, Sandy doesn't need parades or medals. She adjusts her helmet, checks her equipment, and returns to her lab, ready for whatever impossible problem tomorrow brings. That readiness, that quiet confidence, becomes her strength, even if nobody else recognizes it. In the end, Sandy gains something more valuable than recognition. She gains the understanding that she can protect a community that desperately needs protection. Whether they realize it or not, she becomes Bikini Bottom's invisible guardian, the scientific mind that keeps their chaotic world from completely falling apart. And somehow, that's enough. Sandy's steady presence and calm approach to Bikini Bottom's chaos sets the stage for her next chapter. The hardest part about surviving impossible situations is figuring out how to live normally afterward. Sandy Cheeks knows this better than most. She's prevented apocalypses, solved divine disasters, and kept Bikini Bottom from collapsing more times than anyone realizes. But when the chaos chaos ends and life returns to its regular rhythm, what do you do with all that hard-won wisdom? For Sandy, the answer isn't dramatic. She doesn't become a different person or abandon her old routine. Instead, she finds herself approaching familiar problems with unfamiliar calm. The small crises that used to demand immediate action now feel manageable. The everyday chaos that once frustrated her scientific mind now seem almost predictable. This shift shows up in subtle ways. How she responds to emergencies, when she chooses to intervene, and when she decides to step back and let others handle things. Sandy has learned something that only comes through surviving real danger. Not every problem requires her personal solution. Sandy doesn't announce her transformation or demand recognition for what she survived. She just moves through her regular routines with something new underneath. A deeper understanding of what matters and what doesn't. The crises that used to feel overwhelming now seem manageable. The chaos that once frustrated her now feels familiar, almost comforting. This shift becomes clear in how she handles the smaller disasters that define normal life underwater. When SpongeBob gets lost trying to find a shortcut to work, Sandy doesn't panic or immediately jump in with scientific solutions. She lets him figure it out, knowing that some lessons only stick when you learn them yourself. Lost in Bikini Bottom shows Sandy operating from a completely different mindset than she used to have. When SpongeBob calls from a payphone, desperate and confused after a shortcut attempt goes wrong, Sandy's influence appears not through direct intervention, but through the wilderness trainings she's already given him. She's taught him to use landmarks, to stay calm when lost, and to think systematically about problems. The episode reveals something crucial about Sandy's evolution. She's moved beyond needing to personally solve every crisis. Instead, she's building system and teaching beyond needing to personally solve every crisis. SpongeBob remembers her advice about mapping local landmarks precisely when he needs it the most. Her voice in his head guides him through the confusion, even when she's not physically present. This represents a fundamental shift in how Sandy approaches her role at Bikini Bottom. Early in her underwater life, she would have immediately suited up, fired up her helicopter, and tracked SpongeBob down herself. Now she understands that rescue doesn't always mean swooping in to save the day. Sometimes it means giving people the tools they need to save themselves. When SpongeBob finally makes it back to the Krusty Krab, dirty, exhausted, but victorious, Sandy's training has proven itself. He navigated the strange parts of town, found help when he needed it, and solved his own crisis using the principles she taught him. Sandy doesn't appear in the episode, but her influence shapes everything that happens. This absence speaks to Sandy's growing comfort with her place in Bikini Bottom's ecosystem. She doesn't need to be the visible hero anymore. She can work behind the scenes, building foundations that support the community when chaos inevitably strikes. Her helicopter sits ready, her scientific knowledge remains available, but she's learned when to use them and when to let others handle things. SpongeBob's Place pushes this evolution further by testing Sandy's loyalty when the basic structure of her world starts shifting. When SpongeBob accidentally creates his own restaurant empire and threatens Mr. Krabs' business model, Sandy faces a choice about where her allegiances really lie. The episode doesn't show Sandy directly, but her absence is significant. While customers abandon the Krusty Krab for SpongeBob's home-cooked patties, while Mr. Krabs desperately tries increasingly ridiculous schemes to win them back, Sandy remains notably uninvolved in the drama. She's not choosing sides or trying to fix the situation through scientific intervention. This restraint represents a major development in Sandy's character. The old Sandy might have tried to solve the conflict through technical innovation, maybe inventing a better cooking system for Mr. Krabs, or analyzing what makes SpongeBob's patty superior. Instead, she lets the situation play out naturally, understanding that some problems resolve themselves when people figure out what they actually value. When health inspectors eventually shut down SpongeBob's Place for code violations, forcing everyone back to the Krusty Krab, Sandy's non-intervention proves wise. The crisis resolves without her help, and the community learns something about loyalty and what really makes a place special. By staying out of the conflict, Sandy allows the natural relationships between characters to reassert themselves. Her restraint also demonstrates trust in SpongeBob's judgment and character. Sandy knows that SpongeBob won't abandon Mr. Krabs permanently, that his fundamental loyalty will eventually override his temporary success. She doesn't need to protect that relationship because she understands how strong it really is. This confidence in others marks Sandy's biggest transformation. She's moved from being the outsider who had to prove herself through constant action to being an insider who can afford to watch and wait. She's secure enough in her relationships and her role that she doesn't need to fix every problem that appears. Both episodes show Sandy navigating the delicate balance between helping and interfering, between using her abilities and trusting others to handle things themselves. She's learned that being the smartest person in the room doesn't mean having to solve every problem in the room. Sandy's return to normal life doesn't look like a return at all. It looks like someone who's finally found her rhythm in a chaotic world. She keeps her helicopter fueled and her laboratory stocked, but she's stopped feeling responsible for preventing every disaster before it happens. She's learned to pick her battles, to save her energy for the crises that actually require her unique skills. The most telling change is how comfortable Sandy has become with Bikini Bottom's essential weirdness. She no longer tries to impose order on chaos or logic on absurdity. Instead, she's found ways to work within the madness, to contribute without controlling, to help without taking over. This represents the deepest kind of integration. Sandy hasn't lost lost her scientific edge or her Texas determination. She's simply learned to apply them more selectively, more wisely. She's discovered that the secret to thriving in Bikini Bottom is changing herself to find her role within what already exists. When the next crisis eventually comes, Sandy will be ready, but she'll respond as someone who belongs there, not someone trying to prove she deserves to stay. Sandy's calm new approach to life leads her into her next challenge, proving her growth in moments that test her most personal bonds. There comes a moment in every journey when everything you've learned gets put to the ultimate test. For Sandy Cheeks, that moment sneaks up disguised as ordinary problems that demand extraordinary solution. They're smaller, more personal challenge that force her to choose between who she used to be and who she's become. The real test is whether she can save her friendships when everything goes wrong. Shopping List throws Sandy into exactly this kind of situation. When Mr. Krabs sends SpongeBob on a dangerous mission to collect bizarre ingredients, Yeti hair, fang-tooth fish milk, ghost dandruff from the Flying Dutchman, Sandy doesn't hesitate to help. This is about protecting someone she cares about from a task that could easily get him killed. What makes the episode significant is how naturally Sandy steps into the role of protector and partner. She doesn't take over SpongeBob's mission or try to solve everything herself. Instead, she provides what he needs most: her submarine, her expertise, and her willingness to face supernatural danger alongside him. When they encounter the sleeping Yeti crab, Sandy handles the delicate hair-cutting operation while SpongeBob provides distraction. When they need milk from a giant fang-tooth fish, Sandy manages the dangerous milking process while keeping them both safe. The episode reveals how completely Sandy has integrated into Bikini Bottom's ecosystem of mutual support. She's not the outsider trying to prove herself anymore. She's the friend who shows up when things get weird and dangerous. And in Bikini Bottom, things get weird and dangerous a lot. When Plankton inevitably steals their hard-won ingredients, Sandy doesn't panic or blame SpongeBob for the mission's failure. She calmly gets them back to the Krusty Krab, where they discover the entire quest was a decoy designed by Mr. Krabs to distract Plankton while he bought real ingredients from the store. Sandy's reaction to learning they risked their lives for nothing reveals everything about her transformation. The old Sandy might have exploded at Mr. Krabs for the deception. Instead, she takes measured revenge, beating him up proportionally to his offense, taking compensation for her destroyed submarine, and then moving on. She's learned to calibrate her response to match her reaction to the actual harm done rather than her initial anger. This is emotional maturity in action. The incredible shrinking sponge tests Sandy's ability when direct intervention isn't possible. When SpongeBob accidentally shrinks himself to microscopic size, Sandy can't simply fix the problem with a quick scientific solution. This episode doesn't show Sandy directly, but her influence appears throughout SpongeBob's crisis in the form of survival knowledge she's already taught him. This absence is actually more powerful than the presence would have been. Sandy has moved beyond needing to personally solve every crisis. She's built systems, shared knowledge, and created foundations that work even when she's not around. SpongeBob navigates his shrunken world using wilderness survival principles Sandy taught him, demonstrating that her greatest contribution is preparing others to handle problems independently. When SpongeBob finally returns to normal size by absorbing soap and water, growing so large he has to wear the entire Krusty Krab as clothing, Sandy's scientific understanding has helped create the solution. The episode suggests that Sandy's knowledge of absorption, surface tension, and chemical reactions provides the theoretical framework that makes SpongeBob's size changes possible. She's become part of Bikini Bottom's infrastructure, enabling solutions without needing credit for them. Surf and Turf represents Sandy's most personal test yet. When her ship in a bottle contest preparations keep failing, she reluctantly accepts help from Mr. Krabs. This represents a major shift for someone who used to insist on doing everything alone. But when Mr. Krabs destroys her tree to build his giant entry and steals her tree dome to enter the contest, Sandy faces the ultimate choice between her Texas independence and her Bikini Bottom relationship. The old Sandy might have permanently severed ties with Mr. Krab after such a betrayal. Instead, she pursues him not for revenge, but to reclaim what's rightfully hers. The high-speed chase through Bikini Bottom streets demonstrates Sandy's evolution from isolated scientist to active community member. She's not trying to hurt Mr. Krabs. She's trying to stop him from destroying the contest and cheating other participants. When Sandy accidentally destroys Mr. Krabs' entry while trying to stop him, she doesn't celebrate his failure. Instead, she ends up winning the contest by default, rolled up in her helmet like a literal squirrel in a bottle. The victory is hollow because it came through destruction rather than creation. But Sandy uses it as an opportunity to teach Mr. Krabs about consequences. Her punishment for Mr. Krabs, making him rebuild her tree while wearing an electric collar, is proportional justice rather than vindictive revenge. She's learned to balance accountability with forgiveness, consequences with redemption. The episode ends with Mr. Krabs working to repair what he destroyed while Sandy plants a new tree seed, symbolizing how damage can lead to growth when handled properly. These 3 episodes show Sandy passing her final tests, not through grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but through consistent choice to prioritize relationships over pride, community over isolation, and growth over revenge. She has proven that she can maintain her essential sandiness while fully belonging to Bikini Bottom's chaotic, caring, utterly unpredictable world. The squirrel who once built walls to keep the ocean out has learned to let it in, and discovered that the flooding doesn't doesn't destroy her, it helps her bloom. Sandy's last tests prove she's become a real part of Bikini Bottom, and now it's time to show how she turns that into something everyone can rely on. Sandy doesn't end her story with a Nobel Prize, or a statue in the town square, or her name on a laboratory building. She ends it back where it all began. Let's be honest, that's not heroes are supposed to finish, right? We expect recognition, fame, maybe a documentary about her amazing scientific discoveries. Instead, she's in her tree dome, tinkering with inventions nobody asked for. She's still the only land mammal in the underwater world. She's still dealing with SpongeBob's chaos and Patrick's confusion. Nothing looks different, but everything is. The Great Patty Caper shows what Sandy has quietly accomplished without anyone realizing it. When the Krabby Patty formula disappears and Bikini Bottom faces its biggest crisis, the community doesn't fall apart like it would have when Sandy first arrived. Instead, they use detective work, systematic thinking, and collaborative problem solving, all approaches Sandy introduced to their chaotic world. She doesn't appear in the episode, but her fingerprints are everywhere. SpongeBob's methodical investigation of suspects reflects Sandy's scientific training. Patrick's moments of unexpected insight come from absorbing Sandy's lessons about observation. Even Mr. Krabs' strategic planning shows traces of her influence on how problems get solved. The train mystery reveals something profound about Sandy's transformation of Bikini Bottom. When SpongeBob and Patrick board the locomotive, they're not just chasing a stolen key. They're demonstrating that this community has learned to face impossible situations with courage, persistence, and mutual support. These aren't skills they were born with. They're gifts Sandy has given them through years of quiet example. What makes this episode powerful is how it shows Sandy's success operating invisibly. She's taught Bikini Bottom to function without her constant presence, to apply rational thinking to irrational situations, and to trust each other enough to attempt seemingly hopeless tasks. The community has internalized her lessons so completely that they don't even realize they're using them. SpongeBob's big birthday blowout reveals the full scope of what Sandy has built. The party planning alone demonstrates a level of cooperation that would have been impossible when she first arrived. Characters who used to compete or fight now naturally collaborate, each contributing unique strengths to shared goals. Sandy has become the invisible architect of a functional community. Watch how effortlessly she coordinates without controlling. Squidward shows unexpected creativity. Mr. Krabs demonstrates loyalty beyond profit. Plankton participates positively instead of scheming. Patrick actually remembers his responsibilities. Mrs. Puff engages socially beyond just driving lessons. Each character has grown in ways that reflect Sandy's influence, but they've done the growing themselves. The surface world segments provide perfect contrast. The human versions of these characters are hollow, simplified copies. They lack the depth and genuine connection their underwater counterparts have developed. The live-action Trusty Slab feels sterile compared to the Krusty Krab, because it's missing the community warmth that Sandy helped cultivate. Sandy's appearance as Carol in the surface segments is telling. She maintains her essential characteristics: karate skills, Texas attitude, practical problem solving, but operates in a world without deep connections. Surface Sandy is competent but isolated, effective but alone. It's a reminder of what Sandy chose to leave behind and what she gained by making Bikini Bottom her real home. When the birthday celebration finally happens, it represents more than just a party. It's proof of the social fabric Sandy has helped weave. The way everyone sings together, supports SpongeBob despite their own chaos, and finds joy in each other's company reflects values Sandy brought from Texas and successfully transplanted underwater. The episode's ending, where SpongeBob's age gets cut off by static, suggests that some mysteries matter less than the relationships built while pursuing them. Sandy has learned that the most valuable discoveries aren't scientific breakthroughs or personal achievements. They're the connections that make a community stronger than its individual parts. Through both episodes, Sandy emerges as someone who found her true purpose, not changing Bikini Bottom into something else, but helping it become the best version of what it already was. She has woven her scientific rigor, Texas values, problem-solving skills, and fierce loyalty so seamlessly into underwater life that they now feel natural and inevitable. Sandy's greatest achievement is teaching everyone around her to be more curious, more supportive, more willing to tackle impossible problems together. She's transformed from an outsider proving her worth to an insider whose presence makes everyone else more capable. When the celebrations end and normal life resumes, Sandy doesn't need special recognition. She's become something more valuable. The steady presence that keeps everything working. The scientific mind that prevents disasters. The loyal friend who appears during difficulties. And the bridge between different worlds that makes Bikini Bottom a place where anyone can belong. The squirrel who once built walls to keep the ocean out has learned to let it flow through her life, and in doing so, has taught an entire community how to stay connected when currents try to pull them apart. Sandy returns to her tree dome, adjusts her helmet, and gets back to work. Same dome, same ocean, same crazy neighbors. But now, she's not the outsider trying to survive underwater. She's the reason everyone else can thrive too. If you guys liked our video, make sure to hit subscribe.